Section 87 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Bepre Miller. Ikwa and Annowee by Elizabeth E. Foulke. They lived in the frozen north, these little Eskimo children. They had been alone for several days. Most of the villagers had gone away to fish. It was nearly time for them to return, and Ikwa was hitching the dogs to the sledge that he and Annowee might go to meet them. Cuckoo, the leader of the team, had given him a playful chase all around the village, but he had harnessed him at last, and he was now ready for work. Ikwa had never had the sole care of the dogs before, and he was very much pleased about it. He had not wished to stay at home with Annowee. He had watched the boys starting off with their fishing spears, and he had longed to go with them. "Never mind, Ikwa," his mother had said as she started off. "You may fish a while when you bring the sledge." So Ikwa was comforted. When the rest were gone, the children tried all the sports that they knew. The snow still clung to the hillsides, and Annowee had learned to make a ball of her little body, and roll down a slope almost as fast as Ikwa could. They had played sandbag until they were tired, but at last it was time to start. Annowee sat upon the sledge, while her brother ran along by the side of the dogs. They were pulling finely, seemed the more ready for work after his frolic. "Let us go across the ice fields. It is nearer that way," said the boy. They were facing the bay. Far beyond the great sheet of ice, the waves danced and lifted their white arms in the sunlight. Farther still, the stately bergs drifted out to sea. The wind was rising, and the air was very cold. "Look, Ikwa!" cried Annowee, pointing off to landward. There was a roaring noise as the ice on the mountainside let go its hold and went crashing into the bay. How it bowed and plunged and splashed! The whales moved off to make room, but Ikwa was not watching. He was thinking of the ice beneath his feet. He had felt it tremble. "We must go back," he said. He turned as he spoke, and looked along the path they had taken. Then he gave a low cry. There was a narrow strip of water flowing between them and the shore. He knew at once that the ice upon which they were standing had broken away from the land. "Back! Back!" he cried to the dogs, who were trotting ahead. They turned at the sound of his voice, and ran toward the shore at his bidding, but the narrow path of water had grown too wide, and they could not cross it, try as they might. No help was near. Must they drift out to sea among the bergs? What if the ice where they stood should part, and let them down into the foaming water beneath? Already the edges began to crack and float off, and how it rocked the great floe! "We must go over toward the middle again," said Ikwa to his sister. The girl did not understand. Ikwa turned and looked earnestly in her face. "See, Annowee," he said, "we are on an ice floe. We cannot get off." She looked at him in a puzzled way. "Don't you see?" he asked, pointing to the water that rolled and dashed between them and the shore. "We are afloat upon the bay." A look of terror came into his sister's face as she cried, "Annowee is afraid." How helpless Ikwa felt! The gale was blowing fierce and bleak. The waves dashed rough and wild around, beneath. The children could only crouch down with the dogs and wait. What would become of them? Annowee began to cry. "I'm cold," she sobbed. Ikwa looked around. All about them the snow lay deep as it did on the land. "I'll make an igloo, Annowee," the boy cried. He rose at once and began to cut the blocks. He had often done this work for his father at home. Annowee forgot her fear in watching him. He made the dogs lie down at her feet to keep her warm. The wall was in the form of a half igloo around the group. Soon it was so high that Annowee could not see him at his work. "It is so much warmer here, Ikwa," she called. "Come in and try it." But Ikwa worked on. He was glad to have something to do. Presently he heard her voice again. "See, Ikwa," she called. The boy hurried around and saw a walrus lying on the floe at one side. It had climbed up there to rest. A vast sheet of water now lay before them, and they had drifted far from the land, but the wind was changing, and the tide, too, was beginning to wash them toward the shore. There was a long strip of land reaching outward near the mouth of the bay. The floe was approaching this opening. Ikwa was watching. He walked over to the side of the floe. "Annowee," he called, "when we float near that point, we must try to gain the land." His sister came across to look. "Unless we go ashore there," said he, "we shall never reach home again." He went over and brought the dogs to the same side with them. "Now, Annowee," he said, "sit down upon the sledge and cling to it. Don't let go your hold whatever happens." "But what shall you do?" she asked. "I'll spring on behind when the time comes," he said. The little girl sat as Ikwa had directed, and just as the floe swept into the narrow channel, the boy gave the dogs the signal. Annowee heard the ringing of his voice, the cracking of his whip, as the dogs sprang forward. There was a swaying of the ice. The cold, salt water dashed over them, and then the little dogs drew them out upon the shore. What a drenching they had had! The dogs were shaking the water from their coats, while Ikwa and Annowee were catching their breath after their plunge. Ikwa turned to see if Annowee was safe. She was brushing the water from her furs. "I was afraid the waves would carry you away," said he. "If it hadn't been for Kookoo, we should have gone down. He led the other dogs straight ahead." Annowee ran and gave the dog a hug, even though his shaggy hair was wet. "You dear good Kookoo," she cried, "you are the very best dog I know." Kookoo pranced and frisked before her as if he understood. They were now out of danger, but they were no nearer their friends than before. "Shall we go on to the river?" asked the girl. Ikwa, who had not thought of turning back, answered, "Yes, climb upon the sledge, and let us be off. We are losing time from the fishing." In a moment they were speeding away over the snow again. When the Eskimos heard the story of the children's escape, they called Ikwa a brave lad. His father, they said, could have done no more had he been with them upon the floe. End of section 87. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas.